Canterbury Trails Farm. Today I'm going to show you how to make elderberry syrup for colds and flus. We also use this as sort of an immunity booster, and when we feel like maybe we've got a little bit of a scratchy throat or a little bit of a snuffled nose, we start taking this as sort of boost our immune system and to sort of try to ward off anything we feel like we might be catching. This has elderberries and echinacea and yarrow, which are all really good for combating viruses and bacteria and for boosting your immune system so it can fight off the viruses and bacteria a little bit stronger. This is a very long cooking recipe. It's going to need to simmer for 3 to 4 hours. So I'm going to go ahead and get it started so it can be simmering during the day. So to start with, I'm going to need 3½ cups of water. This is one of those recipes that I do not double. I make it fresh when we need it. I'm going to need 2/3 cup of dried elderberries. Two tablespoons of ground ginger. 2 tablespoons of ground cinnamon. And this doesn't have too bad of a taste. It's sort of pleasant. It's a bit spicy, but it's not a bad taste. 1 teaspoon of ground cloves. 2 tablespoons of dried echinacea. I should add that I'm using all dried products here, in case you do grow some of your own fresh. And on the echinacea, I'm using root, leaves, and flowers. We're going to need 2 tablespoons of dried yarrow. On the yarrow, I'm using flowers and leaves. I'm going to mix that all up as good as you can with dried herbs here. And as it cooks, you'll be able to mix it a little bit more. Okay, so that's about as good as it's going to get while it's not hot. I'm going to put the lid on it, and I'm going to bring it to a boil. Towards the end, you're going to need 1 cup of honey, and if you have local honey, that's the best, because local honey is going to contain your local pollens that your bees have sourced, and so that will help you combat any kind of like allergens that are local to your area. So we're going to bring this to a boil, and then once it boils, we're going to reduce the heat, and we're going to simmer it for about 3 hours, sometimes 4 hours. And we're going to simmer it with the lid cracked so it can cook down. And we want it to cook down to about half of what we have here. So sort of make a mental note of where it is in your pan, because you're going to want to see it dropping by about half. Sometimes, and it seems to be different every time, and I don't exactly know why. Sometimes things don't cook down. It could have to do, I don't know, with the humidity in the air, how wet your air is. I don't know. Sometimes things don't cook down as thoroughly as they do at other times. So we want to cook it down to about half of what it was. So just sort of note in the pan where it was, so you'll get a good idea of when to stop simmering. So we're going to let that simmer. Once it's done simmering, we'll let it cool, and then we're going to drain it. And then we'll mix in, we're going to need a cup of honey, and we'll mix it all in there, and then that will be our finished product. And this will be stored in the refrigerator. And I'll give you the dosages for taking the product when we're closer to the end of the video. Okay, the syrup is boiling now, so I'm going to put it to, going to pull it off for a minute here and let it settle. I'm going to drop it down to simmer, and like I said, you can start stirring it a little better and getting it mixed now that it's hot. One thing, it also makes your house smell really good. And you'll see all those berries start getting rehydrated in there. I like to sort of give them a little mush on the side. You don't have to, but I just do that sort of pulp them up a little bit. Okay, so I'm just going to put my lid on part of the way so it can still simmer and cook down so all that stuff starts blending, but I don't want it to continue to boil, so I'm going to give it a crack here. My burner doesn't want to settle down. I don't want it to scald. Okay, I'm just going to let that simmer now for 3 hours. Okay, my Mama Goop or elderberry syrup has decreased by about half. It will look very muddy. And that's what we've got there. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off my burner. And I'm just going to let it cool down. And then we're going to strain it into, I'm using a pint and a half mason jar. And it's an odd size, and it happened I went to get quart jars, and somehow one of the boxes had a broken jar, so the sales lady sent a clerk, go back and get me another box, and I was talking to the sales lady, and I just didn't see that she brought back the wrong size. I'm sure to her it was all the same thing. Anyway, so it's a strange jar, so I use them for weird things. Anyway, so this would be great. So I'm going to mix this up. I'm just going to let this cool. And when it's a little bit cooler to work with, we're going to take it over and we're going to strain it. There are a lot of different ways you can strain your herbal mixture, and it's the same way if you've watched any of my salve videos. It's the same sort of process. You want to get yourself a jar. Make sure your jar is going to be adequate. We're just going to be adding 1 cup of honey, so this is probably a little bit bigger than I needed, but that's okay. And I've got my a piece of muslin, and I've got a rubber band. You don't want to make it tight. You want to make sure you have like a well in there because you want all that stuff to go in there. To seal off my jar, I'm going to be adding this. This is my mason jar, makes these. They're just a flip top thing, and it makes it really handy for pouring it out into the cup. And you can store it in the refrigerator this way, and it makes it easier to pour. You can pour it right out of a mason jar, but it does get a little messy. So that's our preparation for our straining, and we're going to wait for our ingredients to cool down just a bit, and then we'll come over here and strain it into our jar. This part can get a little messy. Just want to start adding your and it does take a bit of time depending on how far. If yours didn't cook down too soupy and it's more liquidy, then it will run through obviously faster. And this is still a little hot, but the best way to do it is just sort of lightly skim along the fabric, which encourages anything that has been absorbed by the fabric to start dripping. The more saturated your fabric gets, the more the liquid will start getting through. And also remember, if you're using cheesecloth, you're going to see drippage a lot faster. There's another way you can also do this. I feel like I've cooked mine down a little bit too much thicker than what I usually get. So, because I am also doing a video on a stuffed zucchini right now, I'm going to transfer it and I'm going to strain it with a strainer instead. So let's set that up and look at that. You could do either way. So if you have a runnier product, the muslin and cheesecloth is going to work great. But because of time, I need to work a little faster, so I'm going to start using this fine mesh strainer. Okay, now let's look at the strainer way of doing it here. If I had more time, I might be willing to sit there and mess with it a little bit longer, but I really don't because I'm doing a couple of different videos at the same time. So what I'm going to do, I got my mash, I don't know what you want to call pulped things, And I'm going to just put as much as I could in there without overflowing. And I want to just push down, and I want to extract all of that. And what I'm going to do, I have my muslin that we were using, so I'm going to hold on to that, put it in a bowl so it stays clean. After I get all the liquid out of this way, I'm going to put it in that muslin, and then I'm going to squeeze it. And I'm going to get whatever's left in there. So you see I'm just sort of raking it against the strainer. If you have cheesecloth, you won't be able to rake it on the cheesecloth, obviously, and you'll still be, at the end, you'll still be squishing the cheesecloth. So you pick your method. They both work. I've done them both. So what's left, I'm going to put that in a bowl. So I'm going to save it, and I want to extract as much out of it as possible. So I will be reusing that. Don't want anything to go to waste here. And it's going to look really muddy, like it looks like mud is what it looks like. So if that's what you're looking at and you're like, oh my god, I did something wrong. No, it's going to look really gross. It's just muddy herbs and berries here. And the finished results, the yield will be different every time. Depends on how much everything cooked down, whether it was more liquidy, whether it was too thick. And if you do it too thick, just add about 1/4 cup of water and continue to cook. If it scalds, you can save it. And now if it's burnt, you can't save it. If it scalds just a bit, like you've stepped away, you can also add just a little bit, like 1/4 cup of water, and scrape it real good, and you can salvage it. But if it's burnt, that's a different story. Then you probably need to scrap it and start over. The best way to do this is to have some rubber gloves. And if you don't have, not like nasty cleaning gloves, I mean you want like disposable gloves of some sort that you haven't used for anything else. If you don't have any bags, you can do 2 Ziploc gallon baggies on the hand, or 2 grocery bags that are nice and clean. I would be wary of anything with ink on it. You might want to turn it inside out. But I keep a box of these. They're real cheap on Amazon. You can get like 3 or 4 boxes for like 12 bucks, and I use them for everything. My muslin that we first used. And I'm just going to sort of use my hands here. I'm just going to grab a big heap of that nasty mud leftover herbs that we had. And it feels like sort of wet herbs is what it feels like. And I'm just going to put it in my muslin and just sort of squeeze it. And this is where I was saying that the drier you get the mashed up pulpy stuff in the strainer, the less work you have at the end. Now I guess you could decide to toss all this, but this to me is the really rich part of the concoction here, because this is the last of it. So this is going to be thicker, and you're going to have more of all your good stuff in here. Okay, I think I've reached the end. I'm just sort of making, and you can put the muslin, the whole messy thing can go into your compost bin, because 1 cup of honey. I'm going to pour that right in with that. Alright, the honey will float to the bottom. And when you put it in the refrigerator, it will float to the bottom, so it's good to give it a little bit of a shake before you measure it out. And then I'm just going to put my top. Now, if you don't have a screw on top, you're just going to put a regular mason jar top, or canning jar top on. It's a little bit more difficult to measure it out. It'll last 3 to 6 months in the refrigerator. We've gone a little longer and had it in there for like the whole winter season, and it was fine. The closer you get to the bottom, the grittier it will get because of the sediment will begin to sink. That's what it's going to basically look like. It's sort of a muddy-ish tone to it. You just use a regular medicine cup. And kids' dose is a half to 1 teaspoon daily, and adults is a half to 1 tablespoon daily. And if you have actual flu or you're really sick, you can take your dose every 2 hours, every 2 to 3 hours, until you feel a little bit better or you go to sleep. But we use it, like I said, for the most part, we use it as a preventative. So if you start feeling a little, it's sort of just like taking, an emergency or one of those Zarbee's powder kind of drinks or a lozenge or something. You feel a little bit scratchy throat or, sniffly nose, just take your dosage of the elderberry syrup, or mama goop as we call it. So that's it. It's not real complicated. It's just a lot of cooking time. So if you're going to be in the kitchen anyway, it's a good thing to have on that back burner getting prepared. The time consumption is when you're going through the strainer and the cheesecloth and the muslin and you're getting all the good stuff out. That does take a little bit of time. But the more herbal concoctions and herbal remedies you work with, the more you get used to doing all that, and I think those skills get a little faster because you adapt to, your knowledge adapts to the process, and so you know what you need to do, and you know that you want to squish down anything and get the liquid out and all that stuff. It's a learning curve, but as soon as you master it, it'll go faster. We get ourselves a jar, and what I do is I usually just have a label, and whenever I find decorative self-adhesive labels on sale or something, I usually grab them, but you can just get real plain ones. Put them on your jar, and what I normally do is I just cover that with some clear packing tape so it will stay clean and I can wipe it off. I also usually put another label on the back that has the dosage on there. So I hope this has helped you with cold and flu and sort of, illness prevention and treatment. You'll find a lot of different elderberry syrups, been around for a long time. It was used to treat influenza back in the earlier days before vaccination. Elderberries and echinacea are used to treat a number of bacterial and viral infections, and they're just good helping your immune system do its job. So this has been Angie from Canterbury Trails Farm. Thanks for joining us.